The clerk will read the order of the day.
Don't make a hash of it, Wall.
Private members' business. Items in the order of precedence. Item number 2, standing in the name of Ms Barham in relation to the climate change bill.
Ms Jan Barham.
Mr President, I move that leave be given to bring in a bill for an act to provide a framework for action on climate change mitigation and adaptation in the state, to set targets for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and to provide for monitoring and reporting of the impacts of climate change on people, communities and ecosystems in the state.
The question is that leave be given to bring in a bill. All those of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Mr President, I present the bill and move that the bill be read a first time and printed.
The question is that the bill be read a first time and printed. All those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Climate Change Bill 2015, first reading.
Mr President, I move that this bill be now read a second time. Mr President, I am very proud to introduce the Climate Change Bill on behalf of the Greens. I'm introducing this bill because it is essential that we provide for the well-being of future generations and protect our natural environment and precious biodiversity. If we fail to address global warming and its impacts on our climate, we will leave an unsafe environment and a compromised quality of life to those who inherit the consequences of our inaction. This bill delivers in a fundamental way on our constitutional expectation that the Parliament will make laws for the peace, welfare and good governance of New South Wales. If this Parliament is to act in the best interests of the people of New South Wales, now and into the future, it is our responsibility to ensure that the laws of the state prioritise reducing the risks and the impacts of climate change. There is an unprecedented but foreseeable risk, and there are things that can be done to address it, and it is our responsibility to act. We are faced with a genuine opportunity for New South Wales to be a leader and provide responsible and innovative action on behalf of the people of the state. We can wait no longer for the federal government to lead on climate change. With the new Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, having committed to maintain the weak and ineffective climate policies of his predecessor, we are set to be the international dunces of the United Nations Climate Conference in Paris. As it stands, Australia will be seen as a developed, wealthy country that lacks the courage to make decisions in the best interests of its citizens, and instead has allowed a strange brew of ideology and short-term vested interests to influence its decision-making powers. The New South Wales government has recognised the implications of global warming. In a submission the government prepared for the federal consultation on post-2020 emissions targets, but was never submitted by the Premier, there was a summary of key findings from the NARCLIM New South Wales ACT regional climate modelling projections developed by the New South Wales and ACT governments in conjunction with the Climate Change Research Centre at the University of New South Wales. The submission obtained under GIPA notes that, quote, without significant reductions in global emissions, New South Wales is expected to experience an increase in average maximum and minimum temperatures for the near future 2030 and far future 2070. By 2070, average temperatures will be 2.1 degrees higher than now. Summer and spring will see the largest change, with maximum temperatures up to 3 degrees higher than now by 2070. By 2070, the northwest may see over 40 additional hot days a year, with over 1/3 of the year experiencing maximum temperatures above 35 degrees. Along the Great Dividing Range and the Tablelands, there will be fewer cold nights, potentially impacting on natural ecosystems, snow tourism and cool climate agriculture. In the Snowy Mountains, there will be up to 40 fewer nights with temperatures below 2 degrees. Annual average rainfall will not change significantly, but there will be changes in seasonal rainfall. Increases in severe fire weather during spring may increase bushfire risk and reduce opportunities for hazard reduction burning. In particular, the impacts on the agricultural and tourism sectors, alpine regions, regional and coastal communities, human health and emergency services would be very significant." End quote. These are foreseeable risks that we must take seriously, and we should expect dedicated action at all levels of government. Yet instead of sensible debate about the risks and the pathways to successful mitigation and adaptation, we have had bizarre reflections on the aesthetic value of wind turbines, the glorification of coal, and a strange resistance to embracing the opportunity to have a go and meet a challenge head-on. For too long, we have failed to grasp the opportunity in the face of a serious problem to be innovators, leaders, and to expand into a jobs-rich and economically beneficial future. We have failed to lead the movement for the global action that is needed and to care for the health and well-being of our community and the environment. We are guilty of willful blindness through our inaction on climate change. As a North Coast resident for several decades, I've been very aware of the impact of the climate on our well-being, our safety and our local environment. We've seen the history of cyclones, storms, floods and destruction.
Order. I wonder if the honourable member would just mind me interrupting her. Stop the clock if that's all right. I welcome as they leave in the public gallery a delegation from the Department of Finance of the Yunnan Provincial Government in the People's Republic of China, visiting the New South Wales Parliament as part of a study tour. I hope you have an enjoyable day here at Parliament House and enjoy your visit to Sydney.
Hear, hear. As a North Coast resident for several decades, I've been very aware of the impact of the climate on our well-being, our safety and our local environment. We've seen the history of cyclones, storms, floods and destruction caused by dynamic weather patterns that are the hallmark of the subtropical region. Warming of the oceans and atmosphere mean that the intensity of future events is likely to be amplified by climatic change. And so too will the impacts and the risks we face without the necessary planning and actions to prepare and instill resilience to face disaster. Several coastal storms in the 1970s led to the New South Wales Public Works extensive investigation of coastal erosion. The Barham to Hastings Point report provided sound evidence for the adoption of a coastal management option that became known as Planned Retreat in Byron Shire. At a state level, the 1990 New South Wales Coastline Management Manual required the consideration of global warming in the planning of coastal settlements and directed councils to assess potential impacts. The manual also identified Planned Retreat as a valid management option. This science-based response to strategic planning ensured that the recognition of past risks and threats to the social, environment and economic security of the coast should be considered alongside the risk of global warming. I raise this example as a resident and representative of the North Coast who lives with the understanding of why it's important to act. There are those whose lives have been changed by the events of the past, homes lost, loved ones lost, and their futures altered. They have been supported by our strong communities and the commitment of disaster volunteers, but the government's duty of care to the people means they must act. And as a community activist, then a councillor and mayor, I recognised the importance of responsible approach to planning for the impacts of climate change. Other events have shaped my appreciation of the magnitude of the risk and the need to act, the unavoidable facts that underpin my reasons for introducing this bill. I recall the day in June 1992, sitting in a local cafe with a group of friends listening to our independent community radio station Bay FM broadcasting reports from Rio about the progress of the Earth Summit. In a single day, 154 countries had signed a treaty, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, making a commitment to ensure the stabilisation of greenhouse gas emissions to prevent dangerous climate change and allow systems to adapt, ensure food production isn't threatened, and allow economic development to proceed sustainably. In November of the same year came the news that 1,700 of the world's leading scientists, including the majority of Nobel laureates in the sciences, had presented a warning to humanity. Quote, "Human beings and the natural world are on a collision course," and that fundamental changes were required, including, quote, "a move away from fossil fuels to more benign, inexhaustible energy sources to cut greenhouse gas emissions," end quote. These moments of clear global acknowledgement about the urgent need to address global warming and ensure the ecological sustainability of our planet changed my life. I perhaps naively thought that they would change the world we live in. Personal experience has also left me acutely aware of the health risks that may be intensified by the changing climate. In 2003, I discovered that what I thought had been a severe flu was in fact Ross River fever, and I was forced to begin a rest period of a few months due to the debilitating chills, headaches and painful muscles and joints known as polyarthritis. I've suffered relapses and a compromised immune system, and I hold great concern for the escalation of this condition and its impact on others. Extended warm seasons and more intense seasonal rainfall will create conditions that make outbreaks of mosquito-borne diseases more likely. Last summer, there was a 7-fold increase in Ross River infections, with 540 cases in New South Wales compared to 80 in the previous year. Mosquito-borne diseases, heat stress and the impacts of extreme weather events and the mental health issues that align with those are just some of the many health risks that confront us with a changing climate. And these are issues that this bill ensures will be subject to planning. These impacts will be felt by the most vulnerable groups, including older people, the young, and those who are socially and economically disadvantaged, and a compassionate society will need to plan to support those who are at risk. The 2015 Lancet Commission on Health and Climate Change observed that addressing climate change could be, quote, "the greatest global health opportunity of this century," end quote. Reducing the impacts of climate change and adapting to the changes and risks that are occurring requires coordinated planning across all levels of government. In 2002, Byron Shire Council joined the Cities for Climate Protection program, which is an initiative of the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, delivered in collaboration with the Australian Greenhouse Office. The goal was to reduce greenhouse emissions by at least 30% from 1990 levels by 2020. A greenhouse action strategy was developed and implemented across the whole of the organisation. By 2007, there were more than 220 councils across Australia who were Cities for Climate Protection members, taking action at a local government level. The council's efforts worked in conjunction with the government's Climate Change Fund. These initiatives across multiple levels of government demonstrated the significant work that was possible at an individual and local community level that all worked to increase sustainability and reduce greenhouse emissions. In October 2007, my mayoral proposal for a climate change policy for the Shire to address strategic planning was supported. This year, my successor, Greens Mayor Simon Richardson, has proposed a zero emissions plan for Byron Shire and has been invited to the Paris United Nations Conference. We must acknowledge that when government provides the leadership and support, communities can and will respond. Unfortunately, at all levels of government, that leadership and support for action on climate change has been haphazard and in many cases has been actively undermined, which is why the targets and the ongoing planning provisions in this bill are so important. We have, for the most part, lost a generation of action on climate change. A clear and loud consensus on the threat of global warming had emerged during the 1980s. In 1988, NASA scientist James Hansen testified before the US Congress. Then the Toronto Conference on the Changing Atmosphere was the first major international forum bringing together scientists and politicians in an effort to address global warming. Developed nations called for a 20% reduction of 1988 greenhouse gas emissions by 2005, and the first meeting of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was held. In 1989, the New South Wales Premier, Nick Greiner, moved to adopt the Toronto target, and his government released a discussion paper on the New South Wales greenhouse strategy. Federally, a Senate inquiry reported that early action was essential, and Prime Minister Bob Hawke said that there were considerable scope to immediately reduce emissions. But what followed was a watering down of action and failure to follow through on changes that we, as a society, had the capacity to make. I encourage those who want to know more about how this happened to read the recent book by Maria Taylor, based on her PhD titled Global Warming and Climate Change: What Australia Knew and Buried. Her work shows how the message that we were capable of transforming our society and our industry was undermined by an ongoing effort to cloud the scientific debate and to create the belief that Australia couldn't move away from a reliance on burning and exporting fossil fuels. Mr. President, now 25 years later, and with the world still warming, we are faced with a growing urgency for action. The longer governments delay the process, the greater the problem they are handing to future generations. There are clear and foreseeable risks. All governments have a duty of care to their citizens to act in addressing those risks, and the time to act is now. As the US President Barack Obama stated last year, quote, "We are the first generation to feel the impact of climate change and the last generation that can do something about it." This year, Pope Francis acknowledged the unprecedented threat and called for everyone to act on our responsibility as caretakers of the natural environment. His encyclical stated that, quote, "The climate is a common good, belonging to all and meant for all, and that reducing greenhouse gases requires honesty, courage and responsibility. We are capable of meeting the challenge. But action on the scale of global climate change requires our foundation for consistent long-term action. That is what this bill provides. Clause 5 of the bill establishes a set of guiding principles that acknowledge the serious threat of climate change, the strong scientific evidence about climate change, and the global objective to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in order to limit its effects. These principles include a statement that the government of the day must take urgent action and develop strategies, policies and programs to address climate change. These guiding principles are to be considered by the Minister in exercising functions under this legislation, and Clause 6 provides that all other legislation in New South Wales is to be interpreted to the extent that it can in accordance with the guiding principles. The bill imposes a duty on the Premier to ensure that New South Wales achieves a target of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2040, with interim targets of 25% less than 2000 levels by 2020, 40 to 50% less by 2025 and 60 to 80% less by 2030. These are strong and appropriate targets, consistent with ensuring that New South Wales makes a contribution towards making it likely that the rise in global temperatures can be limited to no more than 2 degrees, and making it possible that we can achieve the goal of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees, a goal that our neighbouring Pacific Island states and leading experts have strongly urged global leaders to pursue. The targets guide our emissions reduction trajectory, but every government from this point forward must play their part. To ensure this happens, the bill provides that at 4-year intervals, the Minister is to prepare a greenhouse gas emissions plan which sets annual carbon budgets in line with the targets and sets out the strategies, policies and progress the government will implement to meet the budgets. And a climate change adaptation plan, which presents an analysis of the likely impacts and vulnerabilities relating to climate change across the state, and identifies strategies, policies and programs to adapt to these impacts and prepare for emergencies caused by climate change. The Minister is to make an annual report about the most recent measurements of greenhouse gas emissions and the state's progress in implementing the plans. If at any time the state fails to meet an annual carbon budget, the Minister must identify the reasons why the budget was not met, the action that is to be taken to ensure future budgets will be met, and the action that will be taken to compensate for the excess emissions. Under Part 5 of the bill, all public authorities, which include every government department and each local council, must prepare a climate change action plan every 4 years that details what the authority will do to achieving the emission targets and adapting to climate change. The bill also introduces a requirement that in exercising its function, a public authority must ensure that it doesn't decrease the state's ability to meet the targets and adapt to the effects of climate change. Importantly, the bill will provide open standing for court proceedings to remedy or restrain any decision or action that would be in breach of these obligations. This is the mechanism to ensure that public authorities are addressing climate change in their decision-making and their activities in a way that is consistent with the relevant plans and guidelines. If a government develops solid plans to contribute to climate action and follows them, then these safeguards will never be necessary. But these provisions will ensure that the public can hold any government accountable. Mr. President, the bill also provides a voluntary mechanism for any private entity to request to be subject to the same obligations as a public authority. Any company or non-government organisation that wants to demonstrate leadership on climate change can notify the Minister, and they would like to be subject to these same obligations to produce action plans and ensure the decisions and actions do not detrimentally affect our capacity to meet the targets or adapt to climate change. This provision will be a welcome opportunity for communities and consumers who are increasingly insisting that the businesses they deal with display a genuine commitment to sustainability and social responsibility, as we've seen in the strength of the fossil fuel divestment movement. Finally, the bill establishes the New South Wales Climate Change Commission, an independent statutory body of 5 to 9 members with expertise in climate change and its effects, who will advise the Minister as well as providing information to and consult with the public. The Minister must consult with the Commission in developing the government's climate change plans. The Commission will publish an annual report that details all the advice given to the Minister. They must also make special climate change reports which will be tabled in Parliament, allowing them to provide independent analysis and commentary about any issues or actions affecting the state's performance in addressing climate change. I note that this bill doesn't dictate what policies or mechanisms the government of the day should use to address climate change. It provides the flexibility for government to determine how it meets the targets and how it develops its action and adaptation plans. The Greens, of course, have their own vision and ideas about the appropriate policies to reduce emissions and adapt to climate change. We have introduced other legislation that reflects some of these approaches. As 2 examples, last year, Dr John Kay introduced the Transforming New South Wales Energy Sector towards 100% renewable bills. And Mr Jeremy Buckingham introduced the Responsible Mining, Protecting Land, Water and Communities Bill. And the Greens will continue to introduce more bills in the future, and we will continue to campaign for the government of the day to adopt policies that are effective in addressing the challenge and that promote climate justice for all. But the current bill has a different intent. The bill provides the framework to ensure that the government is developing its own plans and that the community and business sectors are consulted and aware of those plans. If we are going to live up to our responsibility on climate change, then we need to reach a fundamental agreement about the need for a plan of action. That is what this bill allows us to do. Some might be inclined to suggest that reducing greenhouse gas emissions is a responsibility for the Australian government and that state targets would interfere with the efficiency of federal climate action. But let's face the facts. This is too important for us to fail. And the federal government has us on a pathway to failure. Australia's post-2020 emission targets are among the weakest put forward by developed countries and are insufficient to avoid catastrophic global warming. Around the world, sub-national governments are stepping up to make a significant contribution to addressing climate change. The Compact of States and Regions was established last September at the UN Climate Summit in New York and already consists of 20 state, territory and provincial governments representing more than 220 million people and US 8.3 trillion in GDP, and includes California, New York, Scotland and Rio de Janeiro. These member states make a public commitment on targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and publicly report a standard set of annual greenhouse gas inventory data to the international community. The Australian Capital Territory and South Australia have both already joined. If this bill is enacted, New South Wales could become a leading member of this compact. Mr. President, in 1992, I heard the warning of scientists. I could never have conceived that 23 years later, I would be standing here in Parliament presenting legislation to address our duty of care to the citizens of the state. And it's of further amazement for me to be quoting the Pope. But I've done so in recognition of the breadth of recognition and leadership we're seeing on climate change, and in an attempt to shift the conversation to our responsibility to act. I respect and appreciate the different views of the honourable members in this place. In presenting this bill, I appeal to all of you to seriously consider this proposal that would enable New South Wales to be in a position to report to the UN Conference on Climate Change in Paris that we, like many other subnational governments, are taking responsible action because we can and because it's the right thing to do as elected representatives. This is a significant challenge, and this bill sets us on a course for strong climate action. There is a foreseeable risk from climate change, and we must act. This bill presents the opportunity for innovation. It presents the opportunity to ensure the health and well-being of the environment and the people, and to prepare for an uncertain future. It presents the opportunity for us as elected members to show the courage that is needed and expected to meet the responsibility and challenge of climate change. I take this opportunity to thank my colleague David Mallard for his commitment and diligence to the preparation of this legislation, and I commend the bill to the House.
The Honourable Dr. Peter Phelps.